Welcome, all you Halloween babies out there. I am your host, Billy D, a certified Halloween baby. This is episode 2 of Halloween Babies Podcast, coming at you from Richmond, Virginia, and we are about halfway through the month of October. This episode is dedicated entirely to the film The Empty Man and will be full of spoilers, so you have been warned. Buckle up and hold on. Let's take a ride. The Empty Man was filmed in late 2016, early 2017, and was released to theaters on October 23, 2020. It was one of the last films from Fox that was made before they were acquired by Disney. It was quietly dumped into theaters and made so little money that a DVD release was deemed non-profitable. The film is based on Cullen Bunn and Vanessa R. Del Rey's The Empty Man comic series, published by Boom Studios in 2014. The comic is about a terrible pandemic that causes insanity and violence, and the government enforces a mandatory quarantine. Sounds vaguely familiar. David Pryor then wrote the screenplay based on the graphic novel, and The Empty Man would be his feature film debut, having worked previously directing and producing several making-of documentaries for films, most notably the works of David Fincher and Michael Bay. Pryor also wrote and directed a low-budget short film called AM 1200 that can be found on YouTube. In this short film, you can get a glimpse into Pryor's style and his use of tone and atmosphere. One shot from AM 1200 was actually repurposed for a scene in The Empty Man, where we follow the camera hovering over a map and slowly zooming in and morphing into the highway landscape our lead character is traveling on. That lead character, James Lasombra, played by James Badge Dale, who starred in a 2018 film, The Standoff at Sparrow Creek, that I highly recommend. We also have Marin Ireland as Nora Quayle, and Marin is quickly proving herself as a powerful actor, especially in genre films such as The Dark and the Wicked and the recent Birth Rebirth. Sasha Frolova stars as Amanda Quayle, Nora's daughter. Stephen Root also gives a captivating and charming performance as Arthur Parsons. The IMDb synopsis for The Empty Man is as follows. On the trail of a missing girl, an ex-cop comes across a secretive group attempting to summon a terrifying supernatural entity. For the nature of this episode, that description just won't be enough. So join me as I break down the plot to The Empty Man. The Empty Man opens in the Ura Valley, Bhutan in 1995. Greg, Fiona, Ruthie, and Paul are hiking on a mountain when they cross the first bridge of the film. Paul hears a whistle and follows it and drops into a crevice. Greg rappels down the crevice and finds Paul sitting in front of a shrine to a large, strange, skeletal figure with its many, many limbs positioned symmetrically around it. "If you touch me, you will die," Paul whispers to Greg. Greg ignores this warning, and he and the girls haul Paul out of the crevice, back across the bridge, and find an old, dusty cabin to hole up in because a big snowstorm is coming and they need to check on Paul. Some strange things happen while at the cabin. Ruthie sees a figure outside and goes out to ask for help when she realizes this figure is creepy as hell, and it chases her back inside. She freaks out, grabs a knife, and is pacing about hysterically when we hear banging on the door, and the banging turns into calls from Greg and Fiona for her to open the door. She does, asks them if they saw the figure. They said no, they only saw her. We cut to later that night while everyone is sleeping, and we see Paul hovering over Ruthie, and he's whisper chanting into her ear. The next morning, Paul goes missing, and the group finds him sitting in front of the bridge, blowing into this little flute he brought back from the cave. As Greg and Fiona check on Paul, Ruthie pulls out the knife from earlier and stabs Greg several times, pushing him off the cliff. Fiona comes running at her and gets her throat slit open as Ruthie then pushes her off the cliff.
Ruthie then turns to Paul, and they share a glance as a lone tear falls down Paul's cheek, and Ruthie drops herself off the cliff. Paul blows into the flute again, and we fade to black. Opening title credits. Now we are in Webster Mills, Missouri, and it's 2018. We are introduced to James Lasombra as he's running across the bridge and stops for a smoke on his morning jog. James is a former detective who has his own security business. He's lost his wife and son to a car accident a year earlier. They drove off a bridge. It's now his birthday, and he is sitting alone at a Mexican restaurant, drinking and eating. He comes home and finds Amanda, his neighbor Nora's daughter, sitting in his backyard. They have a little talk. Amanda tells him, "I found something so wonderful and so freeing, and it's helped me to realize that nothing can hurt you because nothing is real. What's real starts here," she points to her head, "and ends out here," pointing out into the world. What we think about with focus and intention and repetition, we manifest. It's the power of positive thinking and negative thinking, right? But what if there's a secret truth? What if our thoughts actually begin somewhere else and they travel through us like a signal traveling down a wire? Thoughts that are old and hidden and singular. The next day, Amanda goes missing, and a message written in blood is found on her bathroom mirror. It states, "The empty man made me do it." James, having an obvious connection to Amanda's mother, Nora, decides to look into the disappearance because the police believe she ran away. She's 18, and she's just a crazy kid doing crazy things. James talks to Amanda's friend Devara, who tells James that she and Amanda, along with 5 friends, were hanging out on a bridge when Amanda encouraged them to summon the empty man, a local legend. You must find an empty bottle on a bridge, blow into it, and think of the empty man. After that, on the first night you hear him, on the second night you see him, and on the third night he finds you. Each member of the group completes the task and then hear noises at the end of the bridge, and they run away. The next day at school, Devara sees Amanda whispering into one of the friend's ears, just as Paul had done to Ruthie. Later, James investigates the bridge and finds the 5 friends dead by hanging with the same message as Amanda's mirror written above their heads. We then see Devara alone at a spa when an apparition appears and stabs her in the face several times, killing her. It is revealed that Devara seems to have stabbed herself. During James' investigation, he found out that Amanda was involved with the Pontifex Institute. He does some research on Wikipedia and discovers that the Institute is a society that started as a New Age cult that based their beliefs on axiosystematics and drew inspiration from the Middle East and Asia. The father of this cult, Wilbur Parsons, had to hide out in a cave outside Jordan in 1947 and discovered the singularity of the universe. He then met up with a wealthy Satanist who helped Parsons to establish axiosystematics and therefore the Pontifex Institute, rumored to be a doomsday cult. There's also rumors that they experimented with the occult, the dark arts. James then learns about tulpas, an object that is created through spiritual or mental powers. Thought plus concentration plus time equals flesh. After having a visit from Nora, we discover they might have had an intimate relationship. Awkwardness ensues, Nora leaves, and James goes to bed only to wake up and deal with a ghostly intruder who seemingly runs away. James is seen taking medication, Doxepin, an antidepressant used to treat depression, anxiety, hives, and insomnia. James visits the Pontifex Institute and sits in on a lecture given by Arthur Parsons, son of Wilbur. Arthur states there is no such thing as disunity. There is only the great binding nothingness of things. James initiates a conversation with Parsons, asking about the empty man. Author states the empty man is a meditation, a focal point for the targeted manifestation of hidden energies. James is like, what? Author responds with, just as man feeds and is fed by the biosphere, the atmosphere, so it is our thoughts feed and are fed by the noosphere, the sum of all conscious thought, transmission from which can be stimulated through the application of certain vectors, very much like a virus. You can't see it. Well, what is it, James asks. Arthur responds with, the veil between form and flesh, and the means by which it can be pierced, and the two allowed to commingle. We're each of us blind in our own way. Distractions rob us of focus. Technology robs us of memory. Repetition robs us of comprehension. You know the child's game, if you say your name enough times, it becomes gibberish? That holds true for whole concepts, even entire bodies of thought. For example, take Nietzsche's old line, if you stare into an abyss, it also stares into you, right? Well, that has been rendered meaningless through repetition. It's a refrigerator magnet. It's a cliche. It's harmless. But when was the last time you really thought about that? What is an abyss? And if you stare into it, why? What about it calls it to you? If it stares into you, it stands to reason something in you must also be calling to it. And that, my friend, is anything but harmless. So the question becomes, if profound meaning can be robbed of something by so simple a task as repetition, which is more fundamental, which is more true, your name, the gibberish. That is the empty man. James then does some snooping around the Pontifex Institute. He finds a barracks room with a group of people chanting. He goes down into the bowels of the building where he finds another group of people chanting. And as he's listening, he senses a presence, and the group blows into bottles. James is then discovered and kicked out of the Institute. James finds and talks to Garrett, a cult member, who tells him Amanda is part of the cult and working her way up the ranks, and that the cult is dangerous and has big plans. Garrett tells James about a camp up in the Mark Twain National Forest, and James heads out. At the camp, James finds an old cabin with files on Amanda and Devara, as well as, to his surprise, a file on himself. However, it is empty. In a second cabin, James finds an old creepy teddy bear and a video of a bald, emaciated man using blood and viscera to paint the image of a figure on the wall of the very same cabin James is in. As he watches the video, the teddy bear starts to move and then disappears. Now nighttime, James searches through the camp, crosses a small footbridge, and comes across a large group of cult members chanting while circling a large bonfire. The chanting gets louder as the fire reaches towards the stars. James becomes entranced. He quickly snaps out of it and turns to leave. Then the chanting stops. James turns around. The lights are out around the group. They're huddled together. They slowly start marching towards him, then stop. James takes a step back. They take a step forward. James takes 2 steps back. They take 2 steps forward. Then James just goes, yeah, no, and gets the hell out of there as the group of cultists chase him, jump on his car. He barely gets away. James then goes to the police, and again, they blow everything off and tell him to chill. So what does he do? He gets his gun, some ammo, a couple of knives, and heads on over to Nora's to warn her some crazy shit is about to go down. He tells her about the cult and the empty man, and the phone rings, and James hears the creepy chanting. James and Nora hightail it out of there, and James takes Nora to a hotel, where we find out James and Nora were having an affair, and he was with her the night his wife and son died. James goes home and sleeps only to wake from a dream of his family, his affair, and a vision of an empty chair in a corridor. He wakes up only to be attacked by a shrouded, ghostly figure that quickly vanishes. We hear a knock at the door, and when James answers, it's that damn teddy bear. The next morning, James wakes up, decides not to take his medication, and puts his wedding ring on. He heads back to the Pontifex Institute with that damn bear for some reason, spots Garrett getting to a car, and follows him as he picks up a bunch of cultists and heads to the hospital. The group goes to the room of a comatose, intubated man, presumably Paul from the beginning. The group surrounds Paul and drop to their knees. Afterwards, James ambushes Garrett and finds out that the man at the hospital is an antenna, tuned to the frequencies we only get through him. He transmits, we receive. Thought is communicable. The noosphere, the sum of all consciousness, ancient consciousness, angry consciousness. And sometimes a man comes along who is a prophet to the other, the between one. He needs an empty man to be a bridge to the rest of the world. He comes to erase all boundaries. The only reality is there is no reality except for him, his endless black chaos. Garrett sees something in James and tells him he's got the itch in the brain. James asks about Amanda, and Garrett says she's on the bridge. Then there is no bridge, and starts laughing. James punches him in the face and hightails it out of there. James goes back to the Pontifex Institute and sneaks in and finds a file on himself, now full of information, clippings and photos of things that reference James' life, but not quite his. He finds a picture of the empty corridor from his dream, but now a new James is sitting in the chair. James heads back to the hospital as we hear whispers. Where were you? He transmits, we receive. You've got an itch in the brain. At the hospital, James questions the night nurse about Paul and learns that he has a visitor, Amanda. James calls Nora and she acts like she does not know him and hangs up. Amanda says that the vessel, Paul, is weakening and can no longer withstand the immense power of the other, and that they must find a replacement. Amanda then tells James he is a tulpa, a new vessel for the other, and that all his memories and relationships were fabricated by her and the cult to ensure that the deity's connection through pain and loss. James must detach from a false reality in order to attach to a new and stronger one. Thought plus concentration plus time equals flesh. We hear chanting. From the bridge comes the man. From the man comes the thoughts. From the thoughts come the dreams. From the dreams come the power. James is all of a sudden back at the corridor of his creation and is chased by the shrouded figure. The other, the entity, overpowers James and overtakes him. James has visions of his old life disappearing as he struggles down the corridor, trying to hold on to his pain, his regrets, his guilt. He emerges from the corridor, now back at the hospital room. He raises his gun and unloads into Paul's skull, recreating the painted image from the wall of the cabin with the video. James exits the room and enters the hall where the hospital staff turn towards him and fall to their knees to bow down. Fade to black. Was James Lasombra a tulpa that only existed for 3 days, manifested by the Pontifex Institute in order to become the next vessel for an entity called the Other? If so, to what end? To serve as a conduit to its followers? To erase all boundaries? To bathe the world in endless black chaos? In the Spanish language, La Sombra translates to the shadow. If we examine the plot of The Empty Man in relation to the Jungian shadow concept, the hidden, repressed, guilt-laden, inferior personality, we can get a deeper glimpse into some of the subtext within this film and perhaps a deeper meaning. According to Jung, the shadow is what oneself as well as others think one is, and through the assimilation of the shadow, the individual is led to self-acceptance and self-forgiveness. All that is unacceptable is suppressed and repressed and becomes part of our shadow. the shadow becomes inextricably entwined with abandonment anxiety, so that its emergence can really feel like a matter of life or death. Through the course of the film, we see James having visions of past trauma and taking anxiety medication in order to deal with guilt and the inability to sleep, the inability to find peace. By the final act, we are led to believe that all of James's past trauma, anxieties, and even his entire history is just a manifestation of the collective mind. We are told by Arthur Parsons, leader of the Pontifex Institute, that there is no such thing as disunity. There's only the great binding nothingness of things. Are we essentially being told that the only true reality and the reality that takes us to a higher plane and our next level of existence is to accept our lives as a collective construct that has no meaning in the grand scheme of things? Once we realize this and confront our shadow self and walk through that door into a world devoid of guilt and sin, do we become the empty man, a vessel that has been purified and therefore sees the world as it truly exists, leaving lesser men to bow down in awe before us.
I first saw The Empty Man on January 13th, 2021, and my initial reaction was, this is what Donnie Darko would have looked like if David Fincher directed it. It's ambitious, dense, dark, ominous, and has a unique tone and atmosphere. The film relies heavily on its score to convey a sense of tension and mystery by using droning tones and mantra-like whispers that trickle and flow like a babbling brook that could almost trigger an ASMR effect in those susceptible to that fuzzy itch-in-the-brain feeling. Some viewers might find this film too long, pretentious, or just not their type of horror, but this is the type of film I hunger for. I have now seen the film 4 times and have gone from a rating of a 7.5 up to a 9.5 and look forward to watching it again. The Empty Man is slowly growing a cult fandom, and with this, we will hopefully get a DVD, Blu-ray release with loads of extras. I eagerly await more work from writer-director David Pryor. I highly recommend checking out his short film AM 1200, available on YouTube, and his contribution to Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities titled The Autopsy, available on Netflix. You can currently find The Empty Man streaming on Hulu or available for rent and purchase on Apple TV and Amazon. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned into this episode, and hopefully you will be a returning listener. You can reach me at HalloweenBabiesPodcast@gmail.com or check me out on Halloween Babies Podcast on Instagram and YouTube, where I have been posting opening shots to non-existing films with music written by me, just like the intro and outro to this podcast. I'd like to give a shout out to the Terror Talk podcast hosted by Shannon and Kathy. There you will find discussion on horror-related topics as well as deep dives into criminal psychology viewed through the lens of a forensic psychologist and a licensed therapist. On the next episode of Halloween Babies Podcast, I will be going over more October movie watches and talking about the 17th annual Richmond Zombie Walk happening in Carytown on October 29th. Thanks for listening, and as one of my favorite directors, George A. Romero, liked to say, stay scared.